My name's Adam, and I had been working the night shift at a gas station for the past year. It's not a glamorous job, but it pays the bills. Most nights are uneventful. A handful of customers stopping in for snacks, gas, or cigarettes. And then it's just me, alone with my thoughts. That was true until one night last summer. It was a Tuesday, so the station was dead quiet. The highway outside barely had any traffic. The only sound inside was the hum of the old fluorescent lights. I was scrolling through my phone, just waiting for my shift to end. Around 2 a.m., the bell rang above the door, jiggled. I looked up, expecting to see the unusual attired trucker or some college kid on a road trip. But instead, it was a man. He was tall and lanky, with sunken cheeks and wild, greasy hair. His clothes were dirty, like he had been sleeping in them for days. He didn't make eye contact or greet me. He just walked straight to the back of the store. I watched him from behind the counter. He wasn't browsing. Not really. He was pacing the aisles, moving slowly, but never stopping to look at anything. Every now and then, he would glance towards the window or over his shoulders like he was nervous about something or someone. I tried to play it cool, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about him. After a few minutes, he came up to the counter. He didn't have much, just a pack of gum, a bottle of water, and when he put them down, I noticed his hands were shaking. "Just this?" I asked. He nodded, his eyes darting around the store. I rang him up, and he handed me a crumpled $5 bill. His finger brushed mine when I gave him his change, and they were ice cold. He muttered a quick, "Thanks," and walked out. I watched as he got into an old beat-up sedan parked near the edge of the lot. The car just sat there for a while. The man didn't drive off right away, and I could feel him watching the store. Finally, what felt like an eternity, he pulls onto the highway and disappeared into the darkness. I thought that was the end of it, but I was wrong. About 20 minutes later, the bell above the door jingled again. This time, it wasn't the man. It was a woman, barefoot, bleeding, and clearly terrified. She stumbled in, clutching her arm. Her clothes were ripped, and there was a cut running down the side of her face. She looked like she had been running for miles. "Help me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I ran out from behind the counter to help her. "What happened?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. She just kept looking over her shoulder towards the door, like she was afraid someone was going to follow her in. When she finally spoke, her voice was shaky. "There's a man. He's been following me." My stomach sank. I helped her sit down near the counter and grab some paper towels to press against the cut. She was shaking so badly, she could barely hold them. Before I could ask her any more questions, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Headlights. A car pulled into the lot, stopping at the far end near the edge of the lights. The engine was still running, but the headlights turned off. It was the same sedan. I froze for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. The woman saw the car too, and she started to panic. "That's him," she said, her voice trembling. I locked the doors and told her to stay out of sight. She crouched behind the counter, and I grabbed my phone to call the police. The car didn't move. It just sat there, the engine rumbling. I couldn't see the man inside, but I knew he was watching us. It felt like hours before I finally heard the faint walls of sirens in the distance. The second sirens got close, the car backed out of the lot and sped off into the night. The police arrived a few minutes later. They took our statement and stayed with us until a patrol car could escort the woman to the hospital. I found out later that the man had been stalking her for hours. She had been walking home from a friend's house when he started following her. He chased her through the woods, and she only managed to lose him when she stumbled onto the highway and saw the gas station lights in the distance. The cops said they would put an alert for the car, but I never found out if they caught him. That night changed the way I feel about working here. Every time I see a car pull into the lot late at night, I get the same sinking feeling in my stomach. And I can't help but wonder if it's him coming back to finish what he started. My name is Jack, and this happened when I was in high school. It was just a regular field trip, nothing out of the ordinary, or so I thought. But the events that unfolded that day have stuck with me ever since. It was the middle of spring, and our history class was scheduled for a field trip to a local historical site about an hour outside of town. It was a sunny day, and everyone was excited about getting out of school for a few hours. We piled into the bus, headed out, joking around and talking about whatever came to mind. When we arrived to the site, it was a large, open field with a few old structures. There was no fence or gate, and the whole place was really quiet. Our teacher, Mr. Carter, told us to stay in groups and wander around, but to be back by the bus in 2 hours for lunch. My friends and I decided to explore the far end of the field, away from the main building. There was a small overgrown path that led into some woods, and we figured it would be a good place to hang out and have some peace. We walked down the path for a while, chatting, not really paying attention to anything specific. As we went deeper into the woods, the air felt heavier, and the silence became more intense. There was no one else around. Eventually, we found a small clearing, and we decided to take a break. We sat down on some rocks and kept talking, but something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, but there was a weird tension in the air. Then I noticed something in the distance. There was a man standing at the edge of the clearing, just outside the tree line. He was tall, wearing a dark hoodie, and just staring at us. I couldn't make out his face because of the distance, but he was standing completely still, not moving. My heart started racing. I looked at my friends, and they noticed him too. "Who's that?" one of them whispered. I don't know. It didn't make sense. This was a public place, and the only people out here were supposed to be our school group. We stared at the man for a few more minutes, and then, without saying a word, he slowly walked into the woods and disappeared behind the trees. "Should we tell Mr. Carter?" another friend asked. I wasn't sure. It seemed like we should, but at the same time, it felt like it wasn't a big deal. Maybe the guy was just a hiker or someone else visiting the site. We stayed put for a while, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I kept thinking about the way the man stood there, staring at us. It felt intentional, like he was watching us for a reason. Eventually, we decided to head back to the main area. We walked quickly, but when we got closer to the edge of the woods, we saw something that made my stomach drop. The man was standing at the edge of the path again, but this time, he was much closer. He wasn't in the clearing anymore. He was almost in the trees, watching us with his head slightly tilted. I froze. He didn't move, just stood there, completely still. His eyes were locked onto us. I grabbed my friends and pulled them back towards the main area. We didn't speak, but we all knew something was off. When we reached the main field, we saw Mr. Carter talking to a few other students, so we hurried over to him. "Mr. Carter," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "there's a guy out there. He's been following us." Mr. Carter looked confused. "What are you talking about? There's no one else here." We turned to look at the woods, but the man was gone. There was nothing there. "No one? Are you sure?" Mr. Carter asked. I was certain. We had all seen him, and we all felt uncomfortable, but the man was nowhere to be found. We told him again, but he shook it off. "You're probably just seeing things. Maybe it was just another tourist or someone who works here." The rest of the day went on without incident. We finished our tour and went back to the buses, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the man had been watching us for a reason. It felt like he was waiting for something, like he wanted us to see him. I never told my parents. It didn't feel like something they would understand. I couldn't explain why. But I knew I wasn't just imagining things. It wasn't until years later that I realized how dangerous that situation could have been. Looking back, I wonder if that man was just some random stranger who happened to be in the area. But the way he was acting, just standing there, watching us, never felt like a coincidence. Maybe he wasn't following us. Maybe he was just waiting for the right moment to make a move. I don't know for sure, but I'll never forget that feeling of being watched. It's a feeling that lingers with me every time I'm alone in a quiet place, wondering if there's someone out there just waiting. My name is Chris, and I never expected what happened to me when I ran into my ex. I hadn't seen her in months, not since we broke up, and truthfully, I thought I have gotten over it. It was one of those relationships that started out great and slowly unraveled. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. It was a Saturday night when it happened. I was out with some friends grabbing a drink at a bar downtown. The usual spot. Nothing special, just trying to forget about the weeks and unwind. I hadn't really thought about her. Not seriously anyway. I mean, we didn't end on terrible terms, but we just weren't right for each other anymore. That's how I saw it. But that night I saw her. I was standing by the bar when I noticed someone walk in. At first I didn't think much of it. But when I turned to look again, I saw her. Emma. It was like everything froze for a moment. She looked different. Dressed a bit more stylish. Her hair was different. But it was still her. And when our eyes met, I felt that familiar pit in my stomach. That one I hadn't felt in months. I wasn't sure if I should go up to her. It had been so long, and I wasn't even sure if we would have anything to talk about anymore. But I didn't just want to ignore her either. So after a few moments of hesitation, I walked over. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. But my voice felt tight. She looked up for a split second. Her face didn't change. But then she smiled, and it was like nothing had changed. "Chris," she said, her voice calm but a little too measured. "I didn't expect to see you here." I could tell she wasn't thrilled about the encounter, but she wasn't angry either. It was that awkward forced politeness that always felt worse than an outright confrontation. We stood there for a second, unsure of what to say. I tried to make small talk, asking her how'd she been, but it didn't feel right. The words just empty. "You still working at the same place?" I asked. "Yeah, same job," she replied, giving me that tight smile again. "And you?" I told her I was still doing the same thing, still figuring things out, the usual. But then for some reason I felt the need to mention something else. "You know," I said, my words almost slipping out before I could stop them. "I've been thinking about us a lot lately. I mean, about everything that happened." Her smile went away a little bit, but I noticed it had been months. "Chris, I think we both moved on by now." And she was right. We had, or at least I thought we had. But in that moment I realized how much I had buried under the surface. Seeing her again, it brought everything back. The good times, the bad times, everything. So, trying to shake the sudden nervousness. "What are you up to these days?" "Besides work, I mean." She hesitated for a moment. "Just, living life." She gave a little shrug. "Nothing exciting." And that's when I saw that. There was a guy standing behind her, leaning in, almost like he was waiting for something. He wasn't looking at us directly, but I could tell he was paying attention. I couldn't help but notice that the way he stood. He was tall, his arm crossed, looking at me like he knew something I didn't. It was a strange feeling. I had no idea who this guy was, but it felt like he was part of something I wasn't supposed to be in anymore. Like he was part of her new life, and I wasn't supposed to have a place in it. "You're still with..." I started, but I couldn't finish the sentence. Emma didn't say anything at first, but then she glanced over her shoulders at the guy, and she turned back to me. There was something in their eyes that I couldn't quite place. "He's just a friend," she quickly said. It was like she was trying to make it sound casual, but I didn't buy it. There was something in the way she said it that didn't feel right. I should have let it go. I should have just walked away and said goodbye and let it be that. but I didn't. Look, Emma, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I didn't mean to make this weird. I don't know, it's just strange seeing you again, that's all. She gave me a nod, but she didn't say anything more. She looked over her shoulder again, and this time I saw it more clearly. The guy wasn't just standing there. He was moving closer. All right, I said, backing up a little. I'll let you get back to whatever this is. She didn't protest, but her eyes followed me as I walked away. I felt weird, but I wasn't sure why. I walked back to my friends, who had clearly been watching the whole exchange. They didn't say anything, but I could tell they were curious. We stayed at the bar for another hour, and as I was getting ready to leave, I stepped outside. That's when I saw Emma again, standing by the entrance with the guy. She didn't see me at first, but I walked past. I noticed something. She was holding his hand. I stopped for a moment and she looked up. Her face was a mixture of surprise and something else I couldn't identify. But before I could say anything, the guy stepped forward. His stance was protective, like he was trying to make sure I stayed away. I didn't say anything. I just turned and kept walking. The thing is, it wasn't just that moment that bothered me. It was the way she acted. How she seemed so eager to show me she was fine, like she wanted me to know. She moved on. Maybe she did. But seeing that guy with her so confident made me realize just how far apart we had drifted. I don't know what I was expecting when I saw her that night. Maybe I was hoping for some kind of closure. But all I got was a reminder that some things are better left in the past. And I couldn't shake the feeling that seeing her with him was just another part of the story I didn't need to be part of anymore. My name's Ryan. I still think about what happened to me all the time. Even now, when everything seems fine, I can't shake the feeling of being watched. The thing about what happened to me, it really never ends. I had always been the type of person who didn't think bad things would happen to me. I didn't think I would ever get caught up in anything dangerous. I had a job at a small tech company, a few good friends, and a steady routine. I didn't do anything stupid. I kept to myself for the most part. It all started on a Wednesday night. I was walking home from work, something I did every day. I usually took the same route down through the park near my apartments, the one with the streetlights that didn't always work. But it was faster that way. It was dark already and the streets were empty, except for a few cars passing by. I wasn't too concerned. I didn't live in the best neighborhood, but it wasn't bad either. There were always people walking around, so I figured I wasn't in danger. That's when I noticed a black van. It was parked just a few feet away ahead of me, near the entrance to the park. I didn't think much of it at first. It was just a van sitting there. Its engine was off, but something about the way it was parked caught my eye. The back door was slightly open. I was just about to keep walking when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned quickly, expecting to be something else walking along the same path, but there was no one there. I don't know why, but my heart started racing. I felt that tight knot in my chest, the one that tells you something's wrong. But I kept walking, trying to shake it off, telling myself it was nothing. That's when it happened. A hand grabbed my arm from behind, pulling me hard towards the open door. I didn't even have time to react. The next thing I knew, I was shoved into the back of the van. My head hit something and everything went dark. When I woke up, I was in a small windowless room. My wrists were bound to thick ropes behind me, and my ankles were tied together. I couldn't move. I could feel the cold concrete under me, and there was a faint smell in the air. At first I thought I was dreaming. I tried to move to scream, but it was like my body wasn't cooperating. My mind was screaming, but my body was too exhausted to respond. I don't know how long I was out. It could have been hours, maybe longer. Then I heard footsteps approaching the door, the sound of keys, and I saw a silver light slip through the cracks of the door as it opened. A man stepped inside wearing a mask. He was tall, built like someone who worked out regularly. His eyes were cold, hidden behind the mask, but I could feel them watching me. Wakey, wakey, he said in a low voice. We got some things to talk about. I couldn't speak. Couldn't even bring myself to look him in the eyes. All I could do was try to pull at the ropes, but they were too tight. He stepped closer, his shadow casting over me. He crouched down, his breath warmed against my ears. Don't try to fight it, he whispered. It won't help you. The fear that hit me was like nothing I had ever felt. My mind was racing, trying to make something sense out of what was happening. Why me? Why now? You're just a pawn in this game. The man continues, his voice almost soothing. I'm not the one you should be worried about. I didn't understand. Who else could there be? I was alone in a room with no windows, no doors, except the one he had just came through. He stood up suddenly and I felt a sharp pain in my chest. My heart racing so fast that I thought I might burst. I couldn't breathe. Don't get too comfortable, he said, turning and walked back to the door. You are not going to be here long. And with that, he was gone. Hours passed. I don't know how many, but it felt like an eternity. I had tried everything to free myself, but the ropes wouldn't budge. I tried to think, tried to come up with a plan, but all I could focus on was the sound of the ticking clock and the knowledge that I didn't know what would happen next. Then the door opened again. This time, there was a different man standing in the doorway. He wasn't wearing a mask, but his face was pale, his eyes sunken, like he hadn't slept in days. He looked as just terrified and tired as I felt. You don't belong here, he mumbled, more to himself than to me. I couldn't respond. I couldn't even understand what he was talking about. He came closer, but instead of saying anything else, he started to untie the ropes. I didn't know if I should trust him, but I didn't have much choice. The moment the ropes were off, I stood up, shaking my legs, weakened beneath me. He didn't say anything. I stumbled towards the door. I just followed him. When we reached outside, I could see the faint glow of streetlights in the distance. The man pointed in that direction, a silent indication to go. I didn't look back. I ran, not knowing if I was running from one danger into another. I didn't stop until I was back into my apartment, slamming the door behind me. Even now, months later, I don't know who those people were or why I was even taken. I never saw that van again. I never saw that man who took me. But I can still hear that low voice in my head whispering to me that I was just a pawn in the game I didn't understand. Sometimes when I'm walking down the street late at night, I swear I hear footsteps behind me. I turn around, but there's never anyone there. I don't know if it was real or if my mind was just playing tricks on me, but I'll never forget that night.